The corridor at Blue Ridge Memorial Hospital in Asheville smelled faintly of disinfectant, rain, and the lilies someone had left near the nurses' station. Andrew Mercer stopped just before room 27 and remained out of sight. Inside, Sarah Collins sat beside his father's bed. "Tell me about that passenger again," she said. Leonard Mercer shook his head, pretending to protest. "You've heard it enough times to tell it yourself." "Not the way you tell it." For the first time that morning, Leonard laughed. It was a rough, uneven laugh, but Andrew recognized something in it that had been absent since the stroke. 3 weeks earlier, his father had awakened unable to move his right hand properly and struggling to find ordinary words. Since then, Andrew had watched doctors measure improvement in charts, and therapists measure it in steps. Sarah seemed to measure it in laughter. Leonard began telling his story about a taxi driver who had argued with a passenger over the fastest road through downtown Asheville. Sarah listened as though she had never heard a word of it before. Andrew stood in the doorway longer than he intended. This had become a habit. During his first visit, he had arrived late in the afternoon. The next time, earlier, then earlier again. Each visit seemed to begin a little sooner, as though he were trying to steal minutes from a clock that had already taken too many years. Sarah finally looked up. "I didn't hear you come in. I didn't want to interrupt." "You weren't interrupting." Leonard turned toward his son. "You're early." A meeting got cancelled. It was technically true. The meeting had been cancelled several days before, but Andrew had learned that half-truths were easier than explaining why he had driven across town before sunrise. Sarah stood and adjusted Leonard's blanket. As she moved toward the medication cart, Andrew noticed a small spiral notebook beside a tray. "Is that yours?" Sarah slipped it into the pocket of her uniform. "It is." "For medical notes?" "No." Andrew raised an eyebrow. "You architects are curious people. You remembered what I do. I called you an engineer last week. You corrected me." "Architect." "Exactly." She smiled and left to bring Leonard a wheelchair. On the table stood a vase of fresh white carnations. Andrew had assumed someone from the hospital had placed them there. "Who brought those?" "Sarah." "Why?" Leonard shrugged. "She says a room with something living in it makes a person remember he's still living too." Andrew looked at the flowers longer than he expected. Then he opened his briefcase. "I brought the insurance forms." Leonard's expression changed. The warmth disappeared, replaced by the guarded look Andrew had known since returning. More papers. Just signatures. Leonard studied him. "Nearly 10 years without seeing you, and suddenly you visit every week carrying paperwork. Somebody has to keep everything organized." Somebody. The word hung between them. Leonard signed with his left hand because the right one still trembled. Andrew collected the pages and slipped them neatly back into the folder. Neither man knew what else to say. Outside the room, Andrew saw Sarah helping another elderly patient farther down the hall. She listened to him with exactly the same attention she had given Leonard. Andrew had wondered whether his father was special to her. Seeing her treat everyone that way should have answered the question. Instead, it made her seem more remarkable. Before leaving, Andrew signed the visitor log. The receptionist asked him to note his departure time. He wrote it carefully. When he reached the parking garage, however, he found himself doing something he had never done before his father's stroke. He calculated how many days remained until his next visit, and whether, next time, he could arrive earlier still. The following morning, Caroline Mercer entered Leonard's room, carrying a leather portfolio. She was Leonard's younger sister, and had handled the finances of his small apartment building for years. Sarah greeted her politely. "How is my brother really doing?" Caroline asked. "His speech has improved significantly. His right side still needs therapy, but his memory is strong. His memory, very clear." Caroline smiled. "That's good." But Sarah noticed something strange. The words sounded relieved. The expression did not. Caroline explained that a guardianship hearing had been scheduled. She believed Leonard could no longer safely manage his finances or property. He owns an apartment building, she said. Someone has to protect what he spent his life building. Sarah chose her response carefully. That decision belongs to the court. Exactly. Before leaving, Caroline requested copies of Leonard's nursing reports and visitor records. She was entitled to them. Sarah had no reason to refuse. Still, as Caroline walked away with the documents, Sarah felt uneasiness settle beneath her ribs. That night, during the final minutes of her shift, Sarah opened the spiral notebook. She wrote Leonard's name and the date. Then she added one sentence. Leonard laughed several times today, once while his son was in the room. She paused. 4 years earlier, after her own father had died in a care facility while she was working an extra shift across town, Sarah had begun recording one good thing she witnessed each day. Hospitals already preserved every fever, fall, complication, and failure. She wanted somewhere to keep the other things. A patient finishing a meal. A frightened woman sleeping peacefully. A husband returning with his wife's favorite sweater. One good thing. Every night. It had begun as grief. Then it became a promise. And somehow, without Sarah noticing when it happened, Leonard Mercer's name had started appearing more often than anyone else's. Andrew returned the next morning carrying another folder. Sarah met him outside Leonard's room. More paperwork? Insurance authorization. Your father might be happier if you visited once without carrying a folder. Andrew stopped. She had already walked into the room before he found an answer. Leonard was sitting upright with an elastic therapy band looped around his right hand. "What am I signing today?" he asked. Andrew placed the folder on the table. "Supplemental coverage." "And how are you?" "I'm fine." Leonard looked almost amused. "I didn't ask for your signature, son. I asked how you are." Andrew uncapped a pen. Talking about forms was easy. Talking about himself required stepping into territory he had spent years avoiding. Sarah rescued neither of them. Instead, she held out the free end of the therapy band. "Andrew." He looked up. "Hold this." "Me?" "Yes, unless architects have rules against helping patients exercise." He took the band. "Firmly," she instructed. "Don't make it easy for him." Leonard pulled. Andrew underestimated his strength and nearly lost his grip. Sarah shook her head. "I said firmly." "Your nurse is bossy," Andrew said. "She has been terrorizing me for weeks," Leonard replied. "Good. Again." The second attempt was better. Leonard pulled repeatedly, while Sarah counted aloud. Halfway through, Leonard complained that Andrew was finally taking revenge for childhood punishments. "You made me watch documentaries about buildings," Leonard said. "You liked them." "I pretended to because your mother needed quiet." Sarah laughed. Andrew looked at his father. For a moment, something old passed between them. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but recognition. When the exercise ended, Leonard leaned back exhausted. Sarah wrote on the clinical chart. "You did well," she told Andrew. "I barely did anything." Sometimes holding steady is enough. Her words followed him for the rest of the afternoon. Before Andrew left, Leonard caught his sleeve. "When I'm discharged, I'm going home." "To your apartment?" "My apartment. You can barely manage stairs. Then I'll learn. The bathroom is too narrow for a walker." Leonard frowned. "I've lived there more than 30 years. I know what my bathroom looks like." Andrew almost argued. Then he stopped. "I could measure it." Leonard stared at him. "What?" "I could measure the apartment, see what needs changing." It was the first useful thing Andrew had offered his father that did not involve a signature. Leonard nodded slowly. "All right." That evening, Andrew drove to the brick apartment building where he had grown up. He still carried an old key. The lock resisted at first, as though the apartment itself had forgotten him. Inside, the room smelled of dust and furniture polish. Andrew opened his professional notebook. For years, he had designed restaurants, offices, expensive homes, and apartment developments for people he barely knew. Now he measured 4 steps he had climbed thousands of times as a child. Too steep. No handrail on one side. The bathroom doorway was narrow. The door swung inward, stealing valuable space. The sink was high. The shower had no grab bars. The kitchen shelves would be difficult for someone whose balance remained uncertain. Andrew began drawing. A ramp at the entrance. A wider bathroom doorway. A sliding door. Reinforced rails. Lower storage. Nothing extraordinary. Less than 2 weeks of work if permits moved quickly. While examining the living room, he noticed an old photograph on the wall. He was perhaps 8 years old, sitting on Leonard's shoulders at a county fair. His mother stood beside them, laughing. Andrew could not remember the day. That frightened him. For years he had told himself that distance erased pain. Now he wondered whether it simply erased everything. The next morning he entered Leonard's hospital room, carrying rolled plans instead of a folder. Sarah noticed immediately. No paperwork? Not today. Leonard put on his reading glasses. Andrew spread the drawing across the bedside table. I can make the apartment work. Leonard leaned forward. Andrew showed him the ramp, widened bathroom, support rails, and kitchen modifications. Then Leonard noticed the window Andrew had sketched beside the kitchen. There was a small vase drawn on the sill. You put flowers there. Andrew glanced toward Sarah. I guess I did. Leonard placed his left hand over the drawing. This is my home. It can still be your home. For several seconds, Leonard said nothing. Then he whispered, let's do it. Andrew began arranging contractors that same afternoon. He did not realize that Caroline had already collected the visitor records. He did not know that every earlier arrival had been documented. Nor did Sarah understand how ordinary acts of kindness could look when rearranged by someone determined to make them suspicious. Several days later, she was summoned to the nursing director's office. Dr. Olivia Bennett closed the door. Sarah, we received a formal complaint. She pushed a file across the desk. Inside were copies of Andrew's visitor entries and Sarah's clinical reports. The allegation is excessive emotional involvement. Sarah felt heat rise into her face. That isn't true. I'm not saying it is. Sarah read the pages. Andrew's arrivals formed a pattern. Earlier, 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 earlier. Beside them were Sarah's observations. Patient motivated. Mood improved. Family participation beneficial. Progress encouraging. All accurate. Yet gathered together, they seemed almost intimate. Caroline filed this? Yes. Why? There's a guardianship case. She claims your judgment may be influenced by your relationship with the family. Sarah stared at the report. Dr. Bennett sighed. I've known your work for years. I trust you. But legal cases change how ordinary things are interpreted. What happens? I have to place a cautionary note in your employment file. Your reports regarding Leonard will receive additional review until the hearing ends. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously toward the pocket containing her notebook. For 1 second she considered showing it. Then she imagined what anyone would see. Pages and pages containing Leonard's name. Personal observations. Little moments. Laughter. Flowers. Andrew arriving early. The notebook would not prove distance. It would prove that Sarah cared. So she kept it hidden. When Andrew arrived later with revised construction drawings, she barely looked at him. From now on, please visit only during the official afternoon hours. He stopped. What happened? Protocol change. Sarah, Nurse Collins. The correction hurt both of them. Leonard watched from the bed. Andrew slowly rolled up his plans. If I caused a problem, tell me how to fix it. There are situations where the safest way to help someone is to step away. Andrew looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Afternoons only. After he left, Leonard waited. Finally, he said, "That was not about hospital policy." Sarah rearranged bottles on the cart. "Please rest. I've been alive long enough to know the difference between leaving because you want to and leaving because staying hurts." Sarah's hands stopped. For once, the nurse who always knew what to say had nothing. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty when Andrew found Sarah sitting alone after her shift. A paper cup of coffee rested untouched beside her notebook. "May I sit? It's a public cafeteria." He lowered himself into the chair opposite her. For a while, neither spoke. Andrew finally said, "If my visits are creating trouble, I'll stop coming early." Sarah looked at him. "You already know they are. I don't want you losing your job because of me. I received a written warning." Andrew's face changed. "What?" "For excessive attachment to a patient's family. I'm sorry. Don't apologize yet." She folded her hands. "Answer something instead." "All right. Why do you keep arriving earlier?" Andrew looked toward the dark cafeteria windows. "You won't like the answer. I didn't ask for a likable one." The silence between them stretched until Andrew finally spoke. "My mother died almost 10 years ago." Sarah waited. She had cancer. During her final months, I was supervising a large construction project outside Charlotte. I told everyone the deadlines were impossible to move. His jaw tightened. They weren't. Sarah said nothing. "I stayed because work was easier than watching her disappear. My father knew. He never screamed at me. That would have been easier. He just stopped calling. And you? I stopped too. Why?" Pride at first, shame later. Then enough time passed that calling felt harder every year. Andrew rubbed his thumb against the edge of the table. One year became another, then another. Eventually, silence became the only relationship we had. And the stroke changed it. The hospital called because I was still listed as his emergency contact. Andrew gave a small, bitter laugh. 10 years without speaking, and somehow my number was still the one he had written down. Sarah lowered her eyes. "The first time I came here, I thought I was coming because I had to. Then I saw you talking to him." "Me? You listened to him. You brought flowers. You argued with him when he tried to skip therapy." "That's my job. I know." Andrew hesitated. "But watching someone care for him made me feel less ashamed for a little while. You were doing the things I should have been doing." Sarah leaned back. "That's not completely fair." "To whom?" "To yourself. It's true. Something can be selfish and still be sincere." Andrew looked at her. Sarah's fingers rested on the spiral notebook. "My father died 4 years ago," she said. Andrew remained still. He was living in a nursing facility outside Asheville. I was working a double shift. They called and said his condition had changed. I kept thinking I had time. Her voice softened. "I didn't." Andrew understood before she said the rest. "When I arrived, he was already gone. I'm sorry. I spent weeks remembering everything I hadn't done. Calls I shortened. Visits I postponed. Sundays I worked." She touched the notebook. "So I started this." Andrew looked at it. "One good thing about every patient I cared for, every night." "Why?" "Because hospitals document what goes wrong better than what goes right. I needed proof that good moments existed too." She smiled sadly. "For 4 years, I promised myself no patient's family would feel abandoned because I was too busy to notice them." "And Leonard?" "Your father became difficult." Andrew almost smiled. "That sounds like him. I don't mean medically." She looked directly at Andrew. "He made me care beyond the safe distance I had built." Then you started appearing earlier, and somehow I started noticing what time you arrived. The admission remained between them. Is that why you were warned? Partly. Then maybe Caroline is right about me. Sarah frowned. About what? At the hearing she'll say I'm a stranger, who returned after the stroke. Sarah went still. How do you know? My father's attorney warned me. Before she could answer, her phone vibrated. Dr. Bennett was calling. Sarah listened for less than a minute. When the call ended, her face had lost its color. What happened? Caroline expanded the petition. To what? The court wants a full competency hearing. Leonard has to appear. Andrew sat upright. When? In several days. Sarah continued carefully. Caroline intends to argue that your years of absence prove you shouldn't influence his decisions. She'll also use my warning to challenge the medical reports. Andrew stared at the table. She isn't wrong about the years. She may be right about what happened, Sarah said. That doesn't mean she's right about what should happen now. How do I explain nearly 10 years? Maybe you don't explain them. He looked up. Then what do I do? Tell the truth about them. That could destroy the case. Maybe. Sarah closed the notebook. But this hearing is supposed to decide whether your father still owns his choices. If everyone becomes so afraid of losing that they stop letting him speak, then you've already taken something from him before the judge does. Andrew looked toward the hallway leading back to the patient rooms. He had spent his adult life solving problems by eliminating uncertainty. Buildings required measurements. Budgets required numbers. Permits required documents. Every risk had a method. Every mistake could be corrected on paper. But nothing in his training explained how to recover 10 silent years. Suppose I say the wrong thing. Then your father will hear you try. Sarah stood. And sometimes being present for the difficult truth matters more than delivering the perfect answer. Andrew remained seated after she left. For years he had believed regret was a debt paid by suffering quietly. That night, for the first time, he wondered whether silence was not payment at all. Perhaps it was only another way of refusing to show up. The family courtroom was smaller than Andrew expected. There was no dramatic wooden bench, no jury, and no rows of spectators. Only a long table, several office chairs, and Judge Nathan Harper in a gray suit. Leonard sat in a wheelchair beside his attorney. He wore the blue button-down shirt he had chosen himself that morning. I refuse to look like someone who has already surrendered, he had told Andrew. Caroline sat across the table with a thick portfolio. Sarah occupied a chair near the wall, present because her records had become part of the dispute. Judge Harper reviewed the documents. Caroline spoke first. My brother suffered a serious stroke several weeks ago. He still struggles with mobility and occasionally takes time to find words. And, she folded her hands. I have managed the finances of his apartment property for many years. I'm not trying to steal his independence. I'm trying to protect him until he recovers. The judge looked down at the file. And his son. Caroline glanced toward Andrew. My nephew returned only after the stroke. Andrew felt every muscle in his shoulders tighten. For almost 10 years, there were no regular visits, calls, or meaningful contact. Each statement was true. That made it worse. I'm sorry to say it this way, Caroline continued, but a person cannot disappear for nearly a decade and suddenly become the one deciding what is best, simply because guilt brought him back. Leonard's attorney objected to the characterization. Judge Harper allowed Caroline to finish. She placed Sarah's disciplinary notice on the table. There is also concern that the nurse supervising Leonard's recovery became personally involved with the family. That raises questions about how objective the optimistic reports really are. Sarah's expression remained professional. Only her tightly clasped hands betrayed her. Leonard's attorney responded with medical evaluations showing steady recovery. Then Judge Harper turned toward Leonard. "Mr. Mercer, I would like to hear directly from you." The room became still. "Do you trust your son to assist you with decisions if you need help?" Leonard opened his mouth. No words came. Andrew felt his heartbeat in his throat. Leonard looked down. His left hand tightened around the wheelchair arm. Several seconds passed. The pause was not especially long. Yet in that room it seemed enormous. Finally, Leonard raised his head. "Yes." Judge Harper waited. "I trust him." The judge wrote something. Caroline's attorney wrote something too. Andrew could almost see the silence becoming evidence. The court scheduled another session several days later, requesting more medical information. Outside, Leonard's attorney pulled Andrew aside. "That hesitation hurt us. He has trouble finding words." "I understand that. The judge may understand it too, but Caroline will argue that it shows cognitive decline. What do we do?" "We control the next hearing." The attorney opened his folder. "We lead with medical reports, therapy assessments, cognitive tests, property documents. If your father is questioned, we keep answers short." Andrew listened. It was a plan, a clear sequence, predictable evidence. Minimal risk. Exactly the kind of approach he trusted. "Good," Andrew said. "We do that." Sarah, standing nearby, heard him. "Seriously?" Andrew turned. "It's the safest strategy." "For whom?" "For my father. He just told a judge that he trusts you." And the pause nearly cost him. "So your answer is to speak for him next time. My answer is to win." Sarah looked disappointed. "Those aren't always the same thing." She walked away. Andrew watched her cross the courthouse lobby. For the first time, the strategy that had sounded perfect moments earlier felt wrong. That night he drove home without music. He kept remembering Leonard's silence. Not the answer. The silence. Andrew had spent 10 years interpreting his father's silence for him. He had decided Leonard was angry. Decided Leonard did not want contact. Decided too much time had passed. Perhaps Leonard had made similar assumptions. Two men living less than an hour apart had each waited for the other to say something. Now lawyers were preparing to do the same thing again. Speak around Leonard. Interpret him. Protect him from his own pauses. Andrew opened the apartment renovation plans on his kitchen table. Every doorway had been measured. Every angle calculated. Every support rail placed precisely. He had designed freedom for Leonard's body while preparing a legal strategy that might take freedom from his voice. The contradiction kept him awake. The following morning, Andrew visited during approved hours. Leonard was practicing lifting his right hand. "Your lawyer called," Leonard said. "He has a plan." "I know." Andrew sat down. "Are you comfortable with it?" Leonard looked at him for a long time. "Are you?" Andrew nearly gave the automatic answer. Instead he said, "No." His father nodded. "Good. That's all you're going to say? You finally answered a question honestly. I thought I should let you enjoy it." Andrew laughed despite himself. Then Leonard smiled. Something between them loosened. Not repaired. Not erased. Just loosened enough for air to enter. Before leaving, Andrew stood beside the white carnations Sarah had replaced. "Dad." Leonard looked over. "At the next hearing, if the judge asks you something, I'm not answering for you." Leonard's face became serious. "I might take a while. Take as long as you need. What if I get stuck?" Andrew swallowed. "Then we wait." It was perhaps the first time in his life he had offered someone time instead of a solution. The second hearing began with Leonard's attorney standing to present medical evaluations. Before he could finish, Andrew rose. His lawyer stared at him. "Andrew, sit down." Andrew's legs felt unsteady. "I need to say something first." This is not what we discussed. I know. Judge Harper studied him. Go ahead. Andrew faced the judge. My aunt is right about one important thing. Caroline looked surprised. I stayed away from my father for almost 10 years. No one moved. When my mother became seriously ill, I buried myself in work. I told myself a building project couldn't continue without me. Andrew shook his head. That was a lie. His voice trembled, but he continued. I was scared. Watching my mother become weaker made me feel helpless, and work gave me somewhere to pretend I was useful. He looked toward Leonard. My father knew what I was doing. After she died, we stopped speaking. Andrew paused. I could say we misunderstood each other. I could say life became busy. I could blame grief. He faced the judge again. But every year there were hundreds of days when I could have called him. His attorney stopped trying to interrupt. I didn't. Caroline shifted in her chair. I returned after the stroke. That is also true. Andrew exhaled. What changed afterward isn't that I suddenly became a perfect son. I'm not. What changed is that I finally stayed. His gaze moved toward Leonard. I started by bringing paperwork, because paperwork was easier than conversation. Then, I helped with his therapy. I measured his apartment. We designed a ramp. A faint smile appeared on Leonard's face. And somewhere between the forms, the measurements, and arriving earlier every morning, I realized I wasn't trying to manage his life. Andrew swallowed. I was trying to become part of it again. He turned fully toward his father. Dad, I want you to speak, Leonard's attorney whispered urgently, but Andrew ignored him. Even if it takes time. Judge Harper leaned back. Mr. Mercer? Leonard adjusted himself in the wheelchair. His voice came slowly. My sister has managed my building for many years. Caroline watched him carefully. I trusted her. He paused to breathe. Maybe I trusted without asking enough questions. Leonard, Caroline began. He raised his left hand. You spoke last time. She fell silent. Leonard continued. That may have been careless. Carelessness is not the same as losing my mind. Judge Harper listened. My son and I did not speak for nearly 10 years. Leonard looked at Andrew. He is not the only one responsible. Andrew's eyes filled. I didn't call him either. Leonard's voice became unsteady, though not from the stroke. I thought he should come first. I thought a son should know when his father needs him. He smiled sadly. Apparently fathers are also capable of being stubborn fools. A few people in the room smiled. After my stroke, Andrew came. Leonard continued slowly. Then he came again. A pause. And again. No one rushed him. Each time a little earlier. Andrew lowered his head. He helped with exercises. He changed my apartment so I can go home. He listened to stories he heard as a child and pretended they were new. Leonard looked toward Judge Harper. I don't know what his intentions were when he first walked into the hospital. Then he looked at his son. I know what they are now. Andrew wiped his eyes. He is learning how to be my son again. Leonard took another breath. And I am learning how to be his father again. The room remained silent. This silence felt different. No one was afraid of it. One more thing, Leonard said. I spent most of my life believing people should understand what I feel without hearing me say it. His voice softened. My son spent years waiting for me to call. I spent years waiting for him. He shook his head. We were both late. Then he smiled toward Andrew. But late is not the same as never. Judge Harper wrote slowly. Then he turned to Sarah. Nurse Collins, questions have been raised about your professional objectivity. Sarah stood. Yes, Your Honor. Anything you wish to add? Sarah opened her bag. For the first time since the complaint, she removed the spiral notebook. This is not medical evidence. She placed it on the table. It is personal. Caroline's attorney leaned forward. Sarah continued. For several years, I've written one positive observation about patients I cared for each day. Why? Sarah hesitated. Because my father died while I was working, and I didn't reach him in time. Her voice almost broke. Writing these things became my way of remembering that a hospital contains more than decline. She opened the notebook. My entries about Leonard began before the guardianship petition. She showed the dated pages. Before Andrew started visiting frequently. Judge Harper examined them. Sarah explained how Leonard's humor, speech, strength, and motivation had improved gradually. The clinical reports say the same things. Why didn't you provide this earlier? Sarah looked at the notebook. Because it was mine. She paused. And because after I was accused of caring too much, showing something this personal felt like proving the accusation. Judge Harper closed the notebook. Why show it now? Sarah looked toward Leonard. Because caring about someone doesn't automatically make the truth less true. The recess lasted less than half an hour, yet Andrew experienced it as something much longer. Leonard refused to discuss the possible ruling. Instead, he complained about courthouse coffee. Sarah sat 2 chairs away with her notebook on her lap. Caroline remained near the far window. For the first time, she looked less like an opponent and more like Leonard's younger sister. Judge Harper eventually returned. Everyone stood. His decision was simple. Leonard retained legal authority over his personal affairs and property. Medical assessments supported his ability to understand decisions, express preferences, and manage his life with appropriate assistance. The apartment building would undergo a routine financial audit, but no guardianship would be imposed. Caroline's shoulders dropped. She gathered her papers. Andrew expected anger. Instead, she looked tired. At the doorway, she stopped. Leonard. Her brother turned. She seemed about to say something. Nothing came. Then she left. Outside the courthouse, Leonard waited for transportation. Andrew stood beside him. What happens with Caroline? We review the accounts. And if something is wrong, we deal with it. Legally, if necessary. Leonard tapped the arm of his wheelchair. But she's my sister. Andrew glanced toward the doorway through which Caroline had disappeared. I thought you'd be furious. I am. Leonard looked at him. Anger and love are not opposites, son. Andrew absorbed the word. Son. For years, hearing it in memory had hurt. Now it felt strangely ordinary. That was what made it powerful. Whatever you decide, Andrew said. Leonard shook his head. Whatever we decide. Several weeks later, Leonard left the hospital. Andrew drove him home. The ramp had been completed. At the entrance, Leonard stopped his wheelchair. You changed my stairs. I improved them. You architects always call changing something an improvement. Try the ramp before complaining. Leonard rolled upward. At the top, he looked back. Not terrible. Andrew laughed. That is the closest you've ever come to praising my work. Inside, the bathroom doorway was wider. Support bars had been installed. The kitchen had been modified so Leonard could reach essential shelves safely. Sarah arrived later, carrying white carnations. You actually put flowers there, she said, noticing the kitchen window. Andrew followed her gaze. The vase from his drawing had become real. Temporary, Leonard announced. Plants belong in soil. Then plant them, Sarah replied. I'm recovering from a stroke. You've been using that excuse for weeks. Leonard grinned. Life did not transform instantly after the hearing. Some mornings his right hand refused to cooperate. Some words remained difficult. Andrew still sometimes arrived carrying work on his phone. Sarah continued to maintain professional boundaries, while Leonard remained under outpatient care. Caroline stayed away at first. The audit found irregular bookkeeping but no dramatic theft. Expenses had been mixed carelessly with building funds, and several transactions required explanation. Leonard was angry. But he did something that surprised Andrew. He called Caroline. She answered. Their first conversation lasted only several minutes. The next lasted longer. A month later, she visited the apartment. The atmosphere was stiff enough that Andrew considered leaving. Leonard stopped him. You stay. Caroline sat at the kitchen table. I thought you would remove me from your life. Leonard looked at her. I tried that with my son. Andrew glanced down. It didn't work very well. Caroline's eyes filled. I was afraid. Of what? That you'd lose everything. Leonard studied her. And somewhere along the way, you decided protecting me meant controlling me. She nodded. I'm sorry. Leonard did not immediately forgive her. That mattered. Forgiveness, Andrew discovered, was different from pretending nothing had happened. Leonard requested clear accounting procedures. Caroline agreed. Trust would be rebuilt with transparency, rather than expectation. When she left, Andrew asked, Do you believe her? Some of it. And the rest? Leonard shrugged. We have time to find out. Time. Andrew had once treated time as an endless supply. Deadlines could be extended. Calls could be made later. Visits could wait until the next weekend. Apologies could be postponed until everyone felt ready. Now he understood that time was generous only when people stopped assuming it belonged to them. One evening, Sarah came by after work. Leonard was asleep in his chair. Andrew and Sarah stood quietly in the kitchen. The spiral notebook rested on the table. You still write in it? He asked. Every night. Even after the hearing? Especially after. Andrew opened to a blank page. May I? Sarah hesitated. Then she handed him a pen. Andrew wrote a sentence. Today my father came home. Sarah read it. That's a good thing. It is. She closed the notebook. For once, neither of them tried to decide what the moment meant. Some relationships, Andrew was learning, became stronger when people stopped naming them too quickly. Half a year later, Leonard could walk from his apartment to the corner store with a cane he increasingly forgot to use. The wheelchair had been folded and stored. The walker remained in a closet. The ramp stayed. Leonard insisted it was useful for groceries. Andrew suspected he simply liked what it represented. On a mild Sunday afternoon, he arrived carrying gardening soil. Sarah followed with young white carnations. Leonard stood in the kitchen doorway, supervising. Not too deep. I know how to plant flowers, Andrew said. You design buildings. And? Buildings don't die because you buried them too deep. Sarah laughed. Caroline arrived carrying lemonade. She had begun visiting occasionally. The first few dinners were uncomfortable. Then someone would tell an old story. Leonard would correct it. Caroline would correct Leonard. Andrew would discover another piece of family history he had missed. Slowly, awkwardness became conversation. The carnations were planted beneath the kitchen window, exactly where Andrew had once sketched a vase. That evening they ate together. Leonard fell asleep in his chair afterward, the television murmuring softly. Caroline left before dark. Sarah found Andrew at the kitchen table with the spiral notebook. What did you write? He turned it toward her. Today we planted flowers with Dad, and nobody had to rush anywhere. Sarah smiled. Over the months, Andrew had added occasional entries in larger, less elegant handwriting. A morning when Leonard made breakfast. The day Caroline stayed through dessert. An afternoon when Leonard walked the entire hallway without help. Small things. Things Andrew once would not have considered important enough to record. He closed the notebook. I used to think important days announced themselves. Sarah sat across from him. They rarely do. Andrew looked toward his sleeping father. For nearly 10 years, he had believed the worst thing he had done was missing the final months of his mother's life. He understood now that the deeper mistake had come afterward. He had treated regret as though it gave him permission to keep disappearing. Shame had told him that because he had failed once, returning would be awkward, hypocritical, perhaps even unwelcome. So he waited. Leonard had waited too. Each man had mistaken silence for a message. Neither had asked whether the other was listening. Andrew thought about the hearing, when several quiet seconds had frightened everyone in the room. Lawyers had seen uncertainty. Caroline had seen weakness. Andrew had initially seen danger. Yet the pause had simply been his father gathering the words he still owned. That memory became one of Andrew's most important lessons. People often rush to fill another person's silence, because waiting makes us uncomfortable. We answer for aging parents. We decide what they must want. We assume what an estranged child thinks. We interpret the hesitation of someone we love before giving them time to finish. Sometimes we call that efficiency, sometimes protection, sometimes kindness. But love that leaves no room for another person's voice can slowly become control. Leonard had needed help after his stroke. That was undeniable. He needed rails in the bathroom, therapy for his hand, transportation, paperwork, and people willing to stand beside him. But needing help did not make him less himself. Age did not erase his judgment. Illness did not cancel his history. A slow answer was still an answer. Andrew also learned that reconciliation did not mean recovering lost years. Those years remained lost. No apology could recreate missed birthdays or ordinary Sunday dinners that never happened. No courtroom victory could return Andrew to his mother's final months. There were losses that could not be repaired. Yet human beings were not buildings. A damaged relationship did not always need to be restored to its original design in order to become worth living in again. Sometimes a new entrance had to be built. Sometimes pride had to be widened like a narrow doorway. Sometimes support had to be installed where nobody once imagined needing it. And sometimes the hardest work was simply staying. Staying when conversation became uncomfortable. Staying when forgiveness was incomplete. Staying while another person searched for words. Staying long enough for anger to become grief, and grief to become understanding. For older people especially, Andrew realized, dignity was often less about independence than participation. His father did not need to do everything alone. He needed to remain part of the decisions shaping his own life. And younger people did not honor their parents by controlling every risk around them. They honored them by listening while there was still something to hear. Leonard stirred in the living room. "Are you two whispering about me?" Andrew smiled. "Yes, I knew it." Sarah stood. Leonard pointed toward the window. "Did you water those flowers?" Andrew looked at the carnations. "Not yet." "Then stop writing about life and go take care of the living part of it." Andrew laughed and reached for the watering can. He understood the lesson. Some things deserve to be remembered. Others deserve to be done before memory was all that remained.